this section, you're going to learn about entities and also the repository pattern. And we're going to see how to implement this in PHP. An entity is basically something of importance, something that represents a reward entity. And usually an entity should have some properties and some behavior. And the repository pattern, on the other hand, is just a way that we create a communication between our data layer, which in this case would be the database, and the entity. So the entity does not know about the database, but through the repository, the entity is able to submit data that will be persisted in the database, update data in the database, and also remove data or any other operation that wants to be done relating to database. So the repository, it's kind of the in-between abstraction between the data layer, the database, or whatever the source of data is, and the object in our system. In this case, which should be an entity. And from the examples that we've been building on, this will be like a bug report. So we have a bug report entity, and this entity is represented in the database as a table. And in order to pass information from this entity to the database and pull back information, we rely on one additional layer, which is a repository. So the repository will help us to insert, will help us to find. So it's just a way of separating things in a proper object-oriented way. The way that you will do this, if you don't want to do the OOP way, which is the really popular way, is to now use the query builder that we already have. So whenever you want to insert into the database, or you want to update record, or you want to delete or query record, you just directly use the query builder class, and then you can just specify the name of the table and then or the information that you want to pass across, and you are done with that. But this is not the way that we should do things in OOP. In OOP, we should have objects, and then we should have clear abstractions and separation of responsibilities between objects. So it is the responsibility of the repository to give us information about a specific entity. So as many entities that we will have in our application, for example, we have separate repositories for them. So if I have a user entity, I will have a repository for that user entity. It will just be dedicated for that user entity. And the same thing for the bug report entity. We'll have a separate repository for that, which is just dedicated. And whenever we want to do anything with that, we need to use that specific repository. And let's quickly take a look at a simple diagram that I have here. And as you can see here, I have the repository interface. And then I have one entity repository, which is implementing that interface. And then I have two separate repositories. One is the user repository, and the other one is the bug report repository. So for anything that is related to bug report, we're going to use the bug report repository. And anything that is related to user entity, if we have this in our application, we're going to use the user repository. And then you can see here that I also have abstract entity, and then I have bug report entities. So this is a simple way to just illustrate how we would design things. So if we have a new entity that we want to introduce, let's say customers. So let's say we have a new entity that we want to introduce, customers. So let's say CUS customers. So this will also extend the abstract entity class. And then we'll have a new repository, which will be for customer repository. Okay, so this repository will be responsible for creating a customer. It will be responsible for finding a customer. It will be responsible for doing anything that we want to do with the customer that has a database implication. So this is basically what we want to implement in this section. So and what you've just seen here now, it's a design pattern which is called the repository pattern, and we are going to be doing the implementation in PHP. All right, so let's get started. In the next lecture, we're first of all going to try to write tests based on the diagram that we have here. We write few test cases, how we want to build this relationship in the application, and then we begin to write the code in subsequent lectures.